and welcome to our podcast with Spencer Wixom. He's the CEO of the Brooks Group. Welcome, Spencer.
Thank you, Gerhard. Wonderful to be here. Good to see you again. Excited for this conversation.
Well, tell me about the new research that your company has been doing and what are the results? I'm eager to learn.
Great. Well, yeah, so I've got a copy of it right here, and we will let this audience know how to themselves get a copy of it. We're launching it this week and sending it out to the market, having our first conversations about it. We recognized with a lot of the change that was happening in the market and buyer behavior and seller behavior last year that we wanted to get an understanding from our perspective with our audience of what's happening. So we went out and did some really deep assessment and study of about 155 senior sales leaders in organizations of 50 million plus to get their perspective. It was across a number of different industries to understand what was happening, how their performance was going in 2023, what they had planned for 2024. And there were some findings in there that were what we would kind of expect in this environment. And there were some findings that were actually rather surprising to us. So that's what we want to chat about today.
So when it comes to sales performance in general, how do you see the dynamics? The way I look at it from two perspectives. One is the perspective of the buyer. What performance expectations do buyers have on salespeople? The second is the expectation level of sales leaders. What do they expect their salespeople to deliver in terms of performance when they interact with buyers? Right. And then probably there's a third perspective, which is yours, which is as a sales training expert. Where do you see the gaps? So maybe we start out with that general picture and how it has morphed and changed over the last few years.
Yeah, let's start with the general picture and then let's dive in a little bit into what that means as far as development. That's what I'd like to talk about. So Here's the big general picture change as we see it. So one of our first questions that we asked these senior sales leaders was most important strategic objectives for 2024. What we got as the most important objectives were very different than what we've seen in the past. If you rewound a couple of years, what you would hear is growth, adding salespeople, finding new customers, growing the business would have been a very common response. Our number one response, so 65% of individuals put this as one of their top 3 strategic objectives in 2024, was increasing customer retention. So we're getting this shift back to recognizing the value of those existing customers, how profitable, how important to a foundation of the business they can be. So retention of existing customers is number one. Number two, at 56% of our audience, was strengthening margins and profitability. This is really an interesting thing, right? Both margins and profitability are two separate things that are important for sales organizations to consider today, and something that wasn't being highly considered in a hyper growth mode of just a few years ago. There are a lot of organizations who are feeling much more a need to fund their growth, fund their operations out of operating cash flow, which means their opportunities need to be profitable. And they also probably have to relook more closely and carefully at the terms and conditions of each of their sales. Not only is this going to be a profitable sale for us, but is this sale going to be supportive of our cash flow goals or dilutive of our cash flow goals? And so all of those things are considerations that organizations are making that I'm seeing kind of a return to those. Those are newer than things we'd seen in the last few years. So I'll pause at those first two. Maybe we can dive a little bit deeper into those if you'd like. I have a third one that I think is also interesting, but what are your thoughts on those first two?
Well, I think that it is so important to maintain stronger relationships with the existing customers because that's where the opportunity lies. I just recently read Value Capture Selling, where
fantastic book.
Yeah, Jean-Claude Lareche from INSEAD wrote about the opportunity that all companies have to look at deals that they're making with existing customers where they actually capture more value for their own company instead of giving away the store. And there's an optimum zone for negotiating deals. And when salespeople are properly trained, they can create a lot more value from existing customers, because new customers are always being treated like, very special, opportunities where they drop their price. And, and that shouldn't be that way. So if in the ideal scenario, to me, salespeople need to be really good at two things. One, creating a better experience with existing customers and getting better margins from them. But secondly, create new customers at higher margins.
I completely agree. And I think it's important for salespeople as well to be transparent with their customers when they're going through these sale and negotiation processes, to talk about exactly why we need certain terms or why we need to structure deals a certain way. Because I think there's a broad appreciation for that. When you can explain, look, this is beneficial to our cash flow. This is the reason why we need these things. We're not just being pushy for pushy sake on certain terms and conditions. I think it helps the relationships with existing customers, because we're all trying to do a very similar thing. We're all trying to operate in a profitable way such that we have the resources to invest in our businesses, to make our products better, to grow our businesses and strengthen them to better serve our customers.
So what was the third thing that you discovered in your research?
Yeah, so the third thing was very interesting. It's expanding existing accounts as different from retaining existing accounts. And I think this is, historically, I think we look at it in a very simple two-dimensional hunting versus farming way. But I think what we're seeing, particularly in this environment, and as deals and relationships become more complex with customers, there are different types of farming, right? So you have what I'll call your John Steinbeck, Salinas Valley farming, right? Very rich, fertile soils. And then there's homesteading, which is clearing the brush and breaking down the rocks in the soil such that it can, you can actually farm the land. And I think as we look at really deepening strategic relationships with customers where we're selling into new divisions or new geographies or new stakeholders in different departments, that can be as complex and as challenging and as uncertain as new business creation. And I think historically we've underappreciated the complexity and the skill set required to do that. And I think organizations need to step back and say, okay, do we have a strategy for retaining existing business which allows for a continuity of account management, relationship management, value creation, value substantiation? Then do we also have a strategy for the heavy lifting involved in growing deeper, expanding out, selling in new solutions to new divisions and such?
Well, I think this is a fantastic insight, because I totally agree that once you have a customer, I was just thinking about the book Acres of Diamonds. I don't know whether you've read it, but
I haven't read it, but I've heard of it.
It's about a farmer who left South Africa and went to Europe and tried to build a business, and then discovered that what he has left were people found diamonds on his property, and you don't want to be in a situation where you have a relationship with a big enterprise customer, have your competition discover the diamonds that are hidden in that enterprise that you don't see, or your salespeople don't see. I remember a very specific conversation with a sales rep I was shadowing to do sort of an audit of sales effectiveness, and I was totally dumbfounded, because the sales rep said, when you meet this customer, you're going to see that I sold them 3 pieces of backhoes, construction equipment, and I'm so proud of myself because that was the biggest sale, in the history of our dealership. And so I sort of filed this away, and we had a conversation with the customer. And then I said, give me a total picture of the operation. You use those 3 backhoes. They're improving your productivity. What are some of the other tools that you're using that you've invested recently? And he talked about new trucks, dump trucks that he bought, and they're not cheap. And the dealership also sold dump trucks. And I just realized that the sales rep has not told the customer that the dealership also sells dump trucks. So his competitor got in without him knowing that there was a need. So he left probably $500,000 on the table.
And what's interesting is sometimes we lose those opportunities, or we miss those opportunities because we're so good at doing the retention work. We found an individual who is so good at that account management and that retention and that support of what has been sold, that they miss the opportunities for the growth. And this is where I think it's really important for organizations to consider doing some deep and careful profiling of individuals when we're putting them into these roles, and to consider, is this a high potential set of existing accounts where really heavy lifting new growth is needed? Or is this a more mature set where that steady support and relationship is needed? And profile the people behaviorally, motivationally, to make sure you've got the right people in place who are, and also maybe looking at your strategy and your comp and all of that to make sure we are all aligned in getting the most out of each of these opportunities. And this is a new area of focus, or I should say it's a return to that focus area. So a lot of organizations are having to relearn how to do it effectively and dust off some strategy that they probably have not used actively in a number of years.
Yeah, I think that there is a different way to look at learning, which is really 3 parts. One, we need to learn new things. The second thing is to unlearn what no longer serves us. With the new AI tools or ChatGPT, we have a different way of looking at customer communications. But as we learn new things, we tend to forget the old things that have served us well. So we need to be relearning the things that we have used some time ago and polish those skills again. It's like old silverware, when you put a shine on it, it looks fantastic. And the reasons salespeople need more training is because it's like muscles. They atrophy if you don't exercise. So you need the reps. And that's what Arnold talks about in his new book, that the repetition may be painful, may be boring, but if you really want to win, you want to condition yourself to a level of higher sales performance.
Absolutely. And let me actually add on that a little bit, just kind of going deeper in this data. So I've talked about our 3 primary priorities for organizations: increase customer retention, strengthen margins, profitability, expand existing accounts. And we can all kind of understand economically, environmentally now why those are priorities for a lot of organizations. They're not for all, but for many, that's the case. What's interesting is below that is a second order of priorities. And those are all around sales effectiveness and sales velocity. So it's all of the old kind of equation metrics, right? My number of deals. Yep. So am I out there in new territories, getting new opportunities in? Am I increasing my average deal size? Am I improving my win rates? And am I shortening my cycle time? So those are all kind of the second order priorities in organizations. What I found was interesting is at the bottom of that list, only 14% selected as one of their top 3 shortened cycle times. And I'm seeing that story play out in a lot of conversations that I'm having with organizations where they're saying, cycle times are really tough nuts to crack these days. Like buyers have pretty much figured out on the average how much time it takes them to make these strategic decisions, and putting a lot of effort at trying to shorten those cycle times seems to not be bearing a lot of fruit. I think a lot of organizations are looking more at how do I, number one, get these average deal sizes larger by bringing a more integrated solution, selling both the backhoes and the dump trucks, as you were saying before. Like, how do I optimize the size and the depth of those deals? And then how do I improve my win rates? Those seem to me to be, when you think about the elements of the sales velocity equation, the two areas where organizations seem to be most focused right now.
Well, I totally agree that people need to refresh the perspective, and this is the beginning of a new year, and I'm so glad that you spotlight sales performance, because to me that's the driver. Those capabilities, if they're elevated to an improved and with good sales training, you can improve it by 27, 30, or 40%. You're going to get better results. You're going to make quota. You're going to make 2024 the best year ever. And I want to invite people to go to the brooksgroup.com and look at that survey. We are actually making this available on sellingpower.com. So we will, when we publish this, we have a shorter version. We are going to publish a link to the survey so you can download it.
No, I appreciate it. Gerhard, can I share one other thing that I think is really interesting that plays off of what you just said?
Yes.
And that is, so look, one of our key findings when we started to dig into the development needs for organizations and what was leading to higher performance, here's an interesting thing that we saw. Number one, everybody's got a sales process. Over 95% of organizations have a process that they follow, or at least they can articulate that some process exists. It's not really having a process that makes the difference. It's adherence to that process. And very specifically, it's close, careful adherence to that process. It's not just sometimes occasional adherence to the process. So what we found is 95% of organizations that meet or exceed target are closely adhering to a sales process. That's compared to 69% of organizations missing target, saying that they closely adhere to a sales process. But what's interesting to me is another statistic in the study that you'll see that 83% of teams that rarely follow the sales process were behind their goal last year. So here's what it lays out for me. You've got this big mushy middle with organizations that kind of sometimes follow the process, kind of don't, and then they kind of sometimes hit their targets and they kind of don't. But the extremes in there are really stark, meaning the organizations that really take it seriously, they train a process, they continue to coach a process, they have an expectation to follow that process very closely, they almost universally achieve their targets. On the other end, the organizations that roll it out, say, we've got it, here it is on a piece of paper, but we're really not going to hold people accountable to follow it because we're going to let people kind of do what they feel is the best thing to do as part of their jobs. They almost universally fail at meeting their targets.
It's really amazing. If you don't train them, you can't blame them. And to me, sales process is also all about sales progress. It's a direct relation, and sales managers that expect salespeople to stick to the process and inspect that process, they're going to get the respect from salespeople and then return process. So it's all about good leadership. If leadership has a process where they inspect and keep tabs on salespeople, and also address the human side of selling. Salespeople are not always very disciplined, and they are freewheeling naturally. But with good leadership and good mentorship, you can have more rigor in your sales organization.
I completely agree. And I think what the lesson this is to most organizations, number one, if you're in that elite top group that's fully adhering all the time, congratulations, you're doing the right thing. If you're in that mushy middle as an organization, you got to think, how do we push for greater adherence? And it's coaching, it's integrating those process elements into your workflow tools, into your CRM, checklist mentality, making sure people are doing things in a very consistent way. Like you said, repetition, building those just tactical muscles to get out there every day. Because we're in a very uncertain environment, right? A lot of organizations right now are handing out goals to their salespeople that salespeople are saying, I have no idea how I'm going to get that this year. I have no idea if I have the resources, how I'm going to make that bigger target you're asking me to do in a very uncertain economic environment. And so if you're in that middle, it's like, how do we push greater adherence? I love that Captain Kirk line from the more recent Star Trek series, right? Where he said, I'm not certain what I should do, but I know what I can do. And that is the strength, or that's the confidence that process gives to an organization. Nobody is absolutely certain what they should do to hit these harder, bigger targets in an uncertain environment right now. But what you should know, if your organization is serving you correctly as an individual salesperson, and your coaches are involved and your tools are aligned and you've been trained properly on that process, you know what you can do every day. And that's what you got to go out and do. And we're finding the organizations who are doing that, who have that discipline, are hitting it almost universally.
I think we need to add one more thing, Spencer, which is the mindset of the sales leader or the sales enablement leader or the revenue enablement leader, which is to have an organization where you are on a team quest for ongoing improvement, where you improve people, processes, and technology, and make selling easier for the salesperson and make it more enjoyable for the buyer.
I completely agree. And I think all of the strategic decisions that you're making and the quote unquote help that you're providing needs to be aligned to, I love the way you articulated that. How do we make it easier for the sellers to succeed? How do we make it easier for the buyers to buy? If you're serving those two ends, you're strengthening things. One comment that I'll make that I found was really interesting, if people read the research study here, is when we looked at onboarding. Onboarding is a critical concept right now for sellers. Number one, you should be assessing and evaluating the personality, the selling capability of individuals before you hire them in the first place. But let's say you get those right individuals, you're highly confident about having those individuals be successful in your sales organization, you need to think about the right way to onboard them. This research study here says it takes about 9 months on the average for sellers to get comfortable selling the product, being out there, doing the motion on their own. And it takes about 12 months for them to say, I am capable to carry a full quota load right now. That's a long period of time. And what's interesting between the organizations that succeed and the organizations that fail is the organizations that succeed are much more likely to do what we call hybrid onboarding. And here are the two pitfalls in onboarding that organizations tend to fall into. Number one, they do a full live fire hose onboarding, meaning we bring everybody together live who's in our new hire class, because we know that's best for episodic learning and for attention and focus and care. And we just blast everything at them. We give them every possible conceivable product detail and, Salesforce process detail and all of those things. And then say, go and do. You've been given everything in the best possible, format we can give you. On the other side, you've got the virtual slog onboarding, which is basically like endless number of Zoom meetings, walking through all of the minutia that we know people don't retain and capture very well. And so both of those, in our estimation, are inefficient onboarding processes. You have to think really carefully about There's a hybrid component live, going really deep, setting the foundation for an understanding of the business, of its products, of our process, of our mission, vision, values. And then there's that's reinforced with virtual touch points over time, coaches, leaders, managers, getting them stronger. And I think if you're really purposeful about that onboarding, you can cut into that 9-12 month average.
Well, that is a fantastic opportunity. I'm trying to get a link. Let's see. We do have a chat. Amen. Process. I'm reading some comments. Process is key for everyone, buyers included. If you map their buying journey to your approach, things become easier. Spot on. Adherence is the key to the process. So I'm dropping the link into the chat. So if you go into the chat, click on the link. That link leads you to the Brooks Group survey, the 2024 sales performance research. Spencer, any final thoughts?
No, Gerhard, it's just great to be with you. I'd invite everybody to check out the research. Would love to have more conversation about it. You can always reach us at thebrooksgroup.com or on LinkedIn, or connect directly with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to have conversation and hear people's perspectives on some of the findings that we're finding that we feel are very important for people to consider in 2024. I completely agree with Dr. Peterson on being customer-centered, customer-focused as we improve these processes. That's a really good point.
Well, thank you, Spencer, for helping improve the profession of selling.
That's what we're here for.